Yesterday, I told my son, my 8-year-old, that he's on the spectrum. It was such a good conversation. I don't even know where to start. Anyway, so going through the process of getting him diagnosed, he was young, so he wouldn't have paid attention to it. I didn't tell him. Then he gets older and older, and last year when he was in first grade, I was asking professionals, like, when should I tell my son he's on the spectrum? Because he needs to know, as he gets older, I think sometimes the differences between him and his peers is a little more magnified. And I wasn't getting anywhere. Most people had told their children when they were going through the process. I didn't. So I was struggling to figure out a way to tell him. And through that process of trying to figure out how to tell my son that he has autism diagnosis, I talked to other parents of kids on the spectrum. I followed Holly Robinson Peete to see if she said anything, about her conversation with her son. I couldn't find the resources. When I would talk to professionals, they would all say, oh, you should tell him, but we don't know how or when. And I had a mom tell me, like, don't overthink it. But here's my thing about that. The reason why I paused and I didn't do it was because I was worried that if I told him, hey, you have autism, he's going to ask me what that means. I'm going to explain. And then he's going to ask me, like, well, what do I do that makes me on the spectrum? I know my son. I know he was going to ask me that. And I thought if I went down that rabbit hole, I would be comparing him to other kids. Well, you know how you do this. Neurotypical kids don't do that. And, that's what makes you on the spectrum. Like, I would get lost in that. And then he would try to not do those things and not be his authentic self because he doesn't want to be on the spectrum. So after a year of trying to find resources, trying to find something, I decided to write a book. And so that's what I did. I wrote a book where my son is the main character. And I go over what autism looks like in different children, because everybody is a spectrum. What some kids do, other kids don't do. No two kids are alike. Like, I have yet to run into a child who is exactly like my son. Like, you might find my son is high functioning that are smart like him, but they have more tics than him, things like that. So I wrote a book, and I started this book like 4 months ago, and I was like, okay, now that I wrote the book, I'm going to tell him. But I was so nervous to tell him. By the way, this is the book. That's my son on the front. What is autism? I was so nervous to tell him because I was still afraid of his reaction, how he will react. But man, my kid is so freaking cool. He was like, so yesterday the book was available. I made some posts on other social media sites, and I was like anxious all day because I'm like, okay, I need to read this book to him. It's time for me to tell him. And I could not find another mom who was going through what I was going through, which I guess, I was surprised I couldn't find another mom who was going through what I was going through. So in the book, he introduces himself. He talks about neurotypical, neurodiverse, ASD, the behavioral health, ABA therapy, speech therapies, things that children take so that they can hopefully become high functioning and be able to do things for themselves. So as I'm reading it, one of the kids, I kind of modeled him after another kid we know, Kellen. And And he was like, hey, Kellen is like that. I was like, yeah. He's like, what is it that Kellen has? I was like, Kellen is autistic. He has autism. He's like, oh, okay. First of all, let me rewind. I took him upstairs to talk to him in private because I have a daughter, and I wanted this to just be he and I. So if he had any questions, if he got upset, if his feelings were hurt, we could go over this. I took him upstairs and I was like, I want to read you a book. He was like, okay. And so he sits down and he's like, so sweet. He sits down with me, he sits on my lap, and I pull out the book. And I was like, I wrote a book. And he was like, what? Mommy, you wrote a book? He was so super excited. When did you write a book? And he look at your name. That's your name on the book. I was like, yeah, I wrote a book. And I was like, I said, does this boy look like you? He was like, no, not really. I was like, okay. I was like, well, it's supposed to look like you. It's supposed to be like a cartoon version of you. He was like, okay, I know. Okay, so I read the book, and there's a character that does some things that our close friend, Kellen, does. And he's like, oh, does Kellen have autism? I say, yeah. And so I'm reading some more of the book, and I use a bunch of different characters, different races. I was only one character in, talking about the first character. And he said, Mommy, do I have autism? I was like, you do. He was like, oh, okay. And so we go on, and I read the book. And at the end of the book, the main character, Jacob, talks about himself and his particular symptoms or things that he does that might kind of stick out as on the spectrum. And the main thing that he does, now that he's older, that is like, oh, okay, for me as his mom and seeing him grow and him learn and get older, is he does not understand sarcasm. So unless you say, I'm about to tell you a joke, or I'm just joking, he believes that everything you say is face value. It's real. And if later, like, for an example, his grandpa had a toy and was like, oh no, this is my toy. And my son was just like, okay. And he was like, can I have it? It's mine. He's joking. All the adults are kind of laughing. Jacob is like staring at him because he's not sure if he should take him seriously or not. And then eventually he gets mad. And I'm like, okay, look, Grandpa was only joking. I don't like when he jokes like that. And I was like, I understand. He was just being sarcastic. When I tell a joke, I tell people I'm joking. That's why when I tell a joke, I tell people I'm joking. That's his thing. Like, to him, he's like, I know how to tell a joke. These other people don't know how to tell jokes. I tell a good joke. I tell people I'm joking when I'm joking. So I talked to him about that. And he was like, but when I tell people I'm joking, and when I'm joking, I tell people I'm joking. They know it's a joke. And I was like, right, but sometimes, like, that's part of the fun. It's like they're being silly. He's like, well, I don't get it. And he pushed back. He pushed back on that. Like, that makes me on the spectrum. Well, other people are stupid, basically. He would never say that, but that was the vibe. Was just like, is that what? Okay. So at the end of it, I said, well, do you have any questions for me? And, do you have any questions? What can I help you with? Is there anything you need to better understand? Anything you want to talk about? How do you feel about this? Knowing that this is your label, Jacob, autism. And he's like, yeah, I got a question. When did you write a book? And so I was like, oh, I wrote it a couple months ago. So did you have any other questions? Well, I want to write a book. I was like, I will help you write a book. I said, anything else? He was like, well, can I take this book to school? I want to take this book to school to show all my friends. I said, taking it to school, you're going to be telling them that you're on the spectrum, right? He was like, okay, not a problem. And man, I appreciate that so much, because writing the book took the focus off of what does autism mean in him. It really was just like, oh, this book is so cool, and I'm happy that you wrote it. Anyway, I wanted to share. If you're looking for it, it's on Amazon.